and welcome to this interview with Laura Beard, one of our artists presently on display at the Alpha Art Gallery's current exhibition, Beyond the Brush. My name is Kira Edgar, and together we will be going over Laura Beard's artistic process, as well as the pieces that were graciously contributed to both our physical and online presentations. We're going to start off pretty simple. Laura, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's begin by diving into your past, I guess. Tell me about your origin story as an artist. How did you get started?
Well, I've always been an artist, and I've been making art ever since I was very little. I had art classes when I was young and through my school years. For most of my informative years, I preferred pencil art over any other medium. It wasn't until I had started my career in art for a few years before I took lessons with Mick Bokelman, an artist friend of mine, and I discovered I loved painting in oil. From there, it really encouraged me to start exploring other different types of painting mediums. And I just fell in love with painting as an art genre, I suppose. And so I've been branching out into as many different types of art forms as I can since then.
That's really amazing. And it's so serendipitous and wonderful that you were able to kind of get that exposure to painting. Was there anything that was keeping you from pursuing it initially, or a hurdle that you faced beforehand?
Yes, there was a little bit of a hurdle in that I perceived painting as a challenge, as something that I could fail on. I think I let the intimidation of working in such a fluid form was intimidating to me. So it took me a long time to get comfortable with the idea that even if it's initially hard to manipulate, it's still a wonderful and valid form in its own.
Absolutely. And I think that that gap of technical skill can definitely be really intimidating for a lot of artists starting out. So seeing how much you've thrived in this medium is probably an awesome, inspirational story to anybody kind of looking into going into painting.
I hope so.
So now that you're more comfortable with oil paints, they seem to be one of your main mediums, particularly in the collection that you've submitted to Alpha Art Gallery. Why did you choose oil paints for this series of portraits?
Oil paints have always been a special medium for me. Well, since I learned how to paint with them. And for the series, I really wanted to highlight the richness of color and depth in oil. And what's really special about oils for me is that it's a very slow to paint medium. And so it challenges me to be more contemplative about how I do my work, how I approach my subjects, and how I want to develop my layers as I go.
That's so interesting, and so it prompts further insights by that, because you have that time and space to sort of consider your painting and your composition.
Yes.
It helps you plan. Wow.
With my other mediums, I tend to go quite quickly. Sometimes it takes me only a few days. With oil painting, it takes me a few days to a few weeks. It's really a different speed than I normally go at.
So you'd say it really shapes your workflow and pushes it in a more methodical direction.
Definitely.
That's so fantastic. It's great to see that you are continuing to pursue this really kind of patient medium to create these fantastic realistic pieces of animal subjects. You really favor this sort of realistic style that must take a really long time. Have you ever considered creating more stylized paintings of your subjects?
I have considered painting in different styles before. I've tried a very abstract style. I've in this sort of mimicking Picasso. That didn't work out too well for me. I also tried doing more of an abstract fractaling of of a particular piece, but I didn't end up liking it either. So I've just stuck with the realistic genre because it's what feels most natural to me.
That makes sense. And you are trying to capture the natural world. So I imagine that kind of marries well together. Is there something in particular that you didn't like about these more abstract representations of the animals you're trying to capture?
I don't think there was anything I disliked per se, besides the fact that I just couldn't get into the abstract nature of these different styles. I guess you could say I'm very controlling in the way that I present my pieces. And so giving up that control and letting sort of the emotions and colors guide me more than what I can see is a little hard for me to grasp.
That totally makes sense. I think your artistic control is so important, and like kind of your decision-making power as the creator of these pieces is so essential to the execution of that vision. What inspired that vision for this showcase?
Well, ever since I was little, I've lived in central New Jersey and been surrounded by the woods and wildlife there. And I've always been captivated by what I've seen before me. And so it seemed natural. It seemed natural to incorporate that as my subject of choice.
So would you say you like kind of go outside and like visit your local parks and sort of?
I do visit local parks, trails. There's a specific park that I know very well. Well, yeah, I know very well, and I take pictures of the wildlife I see there. Most times it's small animals like common birds, a rabbit or two, maybe some squirrels. But I love to try to capture some of the rarer seen local wildlife, such as herons and even some ducks. Sometimes are hard to capture because they just don't want to be around. They don't want to be in close proximity with humans very often. So sometimes it can be hard to capture pictures of them as well. So because I work most of my pieces by photo reference, it's important for me to try to get as many pictures of natural and local wildlife as I can.
That's remarkable. So you kind of do a combination of your own photography, but then keep all of that informed in your personal research so that you can maintain that like kind of accuracy.
Mm-hmm. And with pieces that I cannot get pictures for myself, I usually do a compilation piece where I take multiple references, photos, and combine them into a singular cohesive piece for my more exotic wildlife pieces.
That's a fantastic skill for any kind of reference and sort of creating an imagined or like unseen reality in your art. It seems like these animals, like the depiction of these different species, both local and sort of more foreign to the New Jersey landscape, that's a pattern in your work. How do you choose which animal species to depict?
A lot of it is personal curiosity. I love learning all sorts of different trivia about animals, whether they are local or exotic. And I love to dive deeper into my research of them once they catch my eye. And so if the body is pleasing or if it has a pleasant, interesting like pattern or coloration, that'll usually spark the process of looking further into that into that animal, researching about it, and then presenting a piece sort of reflecting how I feel those animals are in their natural habitat.
Interesting. That kind of research and sort of honest depiction of these animals in their most natural state is really important to you. Would you say that that like realistic and almost educational, like kind of scientifically oriented methodology is informed by your background as like a teacher?
Not directly, in that I started conducting my own research into wildlife before I began teaching. However, teaching has given me a lot of experience and personal insight into my artistic process through answering a lot of questions, really, that the kids present to me when I am teaching them different ideas and concepts that initially I had taken for granted, as I'm sure many artist students have in the past. So it really, teaching really challenges me to think more deeply about the concepts I present, as well as helping me to feel less rigid and less closed-minded to the ideas that I work with in my own art. And so it makes me less precious about the pieces that I am afraid will not turn out right. And it also inspires a excitement over trying a new subject or a new setting that I've never painted before.
That's so great. And I think those are such core insights to the artistic process in terms of overcoming like fear of artistic expectation, and also sort of embracing that childlike curiosity and that freedom to just pursue what interests you. You also discuss thinking about the deeper implications of your work. And I know that you've written about in your artist statement, like how each subject's individuality is super important to you and like kind of their ephemerality as subjects on this planet is also really essential to your mission as an artist.
Yes.
How does this inform your process and your research? What implications do you think this has for your work?
I am very curious about the natural world, and so I want to be able to spark that curiosity in the viewers that are able to see my work. And part of what I think is strongest for me while I'm doing the process is really just understanding what each animal's particular situation is, and almost imagining how I would feel in their position, almost like how one would consider a human portrait. They might consider the lives of the people being painted. I do very much the same with animals. I try to think about what their specific situation is, how they're being affected, and how I could, in even just a little way, create a connection between that animal and the viewer.
So you're trying to promote kind of a like rational as well as like emotional kind of connection and understanding of the creatures you depict. Would you say that this is like kind of moving towards an angle of like wildlife education and preservation in your work?
Yes, I would say it is definitely leaning in that direction, although I haven't considered leaning fully in that direction yet. I do have many pieces that highlight endangered animals, and they are sort of the, I suppose, the main focus of my works, with local wildlife being interspersed as a kind of a buffer between producing each of these very endangered or very exotic animals. So I think that my process is very much influenced by what I'm able to achieve at the moment, and also what has currently sparked my curiosity.
That absolutely makes sense. You're kind of allowing that sort of mindset of change and maybe activist art to slightly inform your choice of subject, but you're also kind of moving with what really interests you and what is currently fascinating to you.
Yes.
Awesome. That's the only way you can, like, you know, keep producing more art that you love and that your audiences will love too, I'm sure. So sort of speaking of your art, I noticed that in two pieces specifically, there's sort of an attention to rhythm and texture and kind of the fauna and flora of the world. I'm talking about 4 and 20, as well as your second work, Sanctuary. How consciously do you think the use, line and composition are used to direct the viewer's experience of these scenes?
I believe it is a conscious and subconscious effort in my art, in that I am consciously working on the feeling of the artwork, the feeling of the animal and the surroundings that the animal is in by looking at it. I love to be able to feel what I see in a way. The textures, the momentum, I love to create that sense for the viewer, and for myself as I'm painting it. As for how consciously composition plays a role, it really depends on the subject I'm working with, as well as the canvases or papers I have at the time, and how well that image fits within the constraints of what I have. Absolutely.
So there's sort of like a planned element, but also there's the practicality of materials and time. And in the case of Sanctuary and 4 and 20, these are both paintings of birds. And so you kind of have more vertical control of where you're placing these sort of creatures of flight. But I imagine in something like Munch, which has a panda, it's a little bit more difficult to fully control where that panda will be in the frame.
Well, Paramore and 4 and 20 are a little bit different in that I knew that I needed a certain orientation for each piece. Paramore is a very tall bird, so the vertical portrait fits it a little better than, say, like 4 and 20, that is more of a horizontal or landscape orientation.
Absolutely. So you're saying you would have more in common with maybe Sanctuary, which is also more vertically oriented sort of portrait of the space.
Yes, and Sanctuary was much more of a conscious choice in that I was trying to sort of highlight the vertical nature of the tree and the boughs that the snowfinch rests in, as sort of like a subtle motif and building of sorts, like a temple or a sanctuary.
As per the title, yeah. And so it's sort of the safe place that kind of encloses the subject and sort of surrounds. Yeah, that's awesome. And so Paramore is maybe like meant to fill the canvas more and kind of have a stage presence as a subject.
Very much so. Paramore is much more like, because of the nature of peacocks, the males like to display their health and virility through their fantastic and spreading display of feathers. And I wanted to capture some of that in with Paramore by sort of mimicking human portraiture, where the more wealthy and prominent people, predominantly men, would sit for a portrait, and they would be a symbol of their status or stature or wealth, to impress other people. And that's very much what male peacocks do, to attract a mate. So I felt it appropriate for the painting of the peacock.
Absolutely. I think that parallel is so interesting in history and like kind of almost goofy, and kind of like imagining this peacock who is the subject as like a king or as a like nobleman in like a 19th century English portrait. You know, I think it's a really kind of powerful parallel to draw, and it kind of creates an immediate understanding for the viewer of the kind of showing off that, you know, is in
Yes.
display, and like absolutely the kind of performance
Yes,
that
definitely.
takes place there. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So shifting the perspective from kind of a performance to this like frame or camera that you have, as the space we're seeing in the portrait, Vision of Home really draws in close and changes perspective to this very intimate close-up of the eye of the portrait subject, kind of looking upon what, according to the title, is a vision of home. What does home mean in the context of this painting?
Well, the painting is a reflection in the eye of a eastern mountain bongo, which is a type of critically endangered antelope in the Congo of Eastern Africa. Currently, there are more individuals of this species in zoos and in wildlife refuges than they are in the wild. They are critically threatened because they are hunted, they're poached for their meat and pelt and their horns. They are also threatened by environmental changes and warring factions in that area. In the sense of vision for home, my painting, the reflection in the bongo's eye is supposed to sort of evoke a human-made enclosure. Also, hopefully, a sense of longing for the bongo's natural habitat, and one day to return there.
That's such a poignant meaning. I don't think you would necessarily infer it immediately, but I think that sort of wishing for home and kind of sort of nostalgia, or maybe like wistful longing, like is such a human emotion, but is so pertinent in this case where you're trying to raise awareness of this very real threat to an entire species. That's absolutely wild.
Thank you. Yeah, and then when I initially painted it, it wasn't as prominent an idea. But as I was naming it, I realized that is the story of the piece. And so, yeah, that became, I became more, by painting it and then naming it, it really opened up that story a bit larger than I had initially planned, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think that's, and the kind of close-up on the eye, like that window to the soul, like kind of drives home the sort of like, I want to say emotionality, like not to project emotion onto the subject, but certainly like kind of the subtle tragedy of the piece. So you have so many like fantastic pieces that are absolutely jam-packed with flora and fauna. But Munch sort of stands out as a departure from this trend. Why did you choose to maintain negative space as like a presence in this portrait?
Munch definitely is different from most of my pieces that I've presented, not only in that I've decided to maintain negative space, but also because the intent of the piece was meant to be a live demonstration as opposed to a studio piece. And so I had sketched out Munch on the canvas, and I had planned to paint Munch during Art All Night in Trenton, New Jersey, which is a large multi-location event where artists and the community are encouraged to interact with each other and share experiences. And because the event is only a few hours long, I knew I had to prioritize my timing in order to be able to paint the piece from beginning to finish while still giving an accessibility to the public to be able to talk to me as I'm working and still produce a detailed piece. So it was more a necessity to remove background from Munch than it was a personal preference, but I think it turned out to be a really nice piece in spite of that.
Absolutely.
And it's also a slightly different medium that I'm usually working with, in that it is a water-soluble oil paint, which means that the oil paints themselves have a surfactant, like soap, that makes the paint bind with water when you rinse it out. And so that helped to speed up the process of painting, whereas regular oil paints would take days, if not weeks, to complete from start to finish.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really great choice of medium for the subject. And it's such a cool opportunity to learn about like the chemistry of paints and the way they interact with the canvas and drying times. That's amazing. I think I definitely agree that Munch looks fantastic, and I think the kind of centering of this character, of this sort of subject, really helps to focus the audience's attention on like this sort of fun and whimsical, but obviously kind of like endangered and sort of struggling creature. But it's a fantastic painting.
Thank you.
And it's great that you have like the support of the Trenton community as well in kind of creating art and finding that space where you can make as a community. Trenton Makes, I know, is like kind of the slogan of the city.
Yes, they have become my sort of my artist family or artist home, in that they're truly accepting of all walks of life and encourage each other to really explore their potential in art, however that ends up being for the individual. And I've struggled to find that in other artistic communities, and so I've just stuck by them, and they've provided me a lot of support. And really, I don't think I would be the artist today if I didn't have that community with the Trenton art scene.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like I've said absolutely a lot, but that's amazing. That you have kind of this formative space that you can really create. And is this event like an annual event that local artists can attend and sort of check out for themselves?
Yes. Although with the pandemic, that is always subject to change. Anyone interested in learning more about Trenton arts community, I would encourage to check out artworkstrenton.org. Artworks is a nonprofit organization for artists in the Trenton community, and they help our artists and the community have events and time to mingle with each other and learn from each other in various ways. So for any of the viewers that are interested, check out artworkstrenton.org and feel free to participate however you feel led.
Thank you so much for sharing. Hopefully our viewers will check it out and be there at the next one. So Munch is definitely like a more negative space defined piece, but Paramore is like absolutely bursting with vibrant colors and bold line work and intricate lighting and details. What was the most challenging part of the process for this?
I think the most challenging part of the process for Paramore was really just the final details of the piece, and I'll explain my process a little more in depth because I think that will really ground why I'm saying this. And that Paramore I have done in multiple steps. Like with all of my pieces, I start out with a pencil sketch on canvas or paper, in this case canvas, to make sure that I have the perspective, proportion, and details where I want them before I commit to any paint. So once I have the sketch to my liking, with Paramore, I started out with a grayscale painting across the entire surface of the canvas. That was a really informative step for me because I really wanted to capture the depth of light and shadow across the whole piece, and being able to translate that into a grayscale across the canvas really helped me to preserve that same value in color. The next step I took for Paramore is I painted in the eye, which may seem like a bit of a strange point to focus on for most people, but for me, the eye is very important in that that's usually where the viewers are first drawn, and it provides an important landmark for me to be able to refer to when painting to keep all of the details in place. From there, I worked on the eye spots of the tail and the brown areas that filled the negative space between the white spokes of the feathers, which is important because when you are doing a piece, you want to hopefully start from the background to the foreground, so all of the details are presented in order closest to furthest when you have the finished piece. So after I finished the background between the feathers and eye spots, I filled in the spokes of the feathers and then proceeded to work on the body and the yellow and green tail feathers of the peacock, sort of flitting between both sections, very similarly to a hummingbird, I've been told. After doing the body and tail and getting the depth of shadow and color the way I wanted it, and as well as the highlights, I moved on to the details of the big tail feathers, so the very wispy frond-like ends of the feathers, and really getting those thin, crisp, straight or curved lines in various colors to give that illusion of the reflective surface.
So would you say those crisp lines are like that most challenging piece of the composition?
By far. I think it is the most difficult for me because I get so focused on getting the details just right that I hold my brush a little too tightly, and that causes a slight wobble in my painting. So I really have to consciously think about not holding my brush so tightly that I create that uncontrollable tension in my hand as I paint.
Absolutely. I think anyone who's ever painted or even had to do like eyeliner or makeup understands, yeah, that's a challenge if you're like really trying to get like a precise line.
Definitely.
Especially with like a medium like oil paints, it's a little bit more kind of difficult to control because it, like you said, it's such a fluid medium. But that's actually really, really interesting. I'm sure that the use of grayscale prior to painting in color really helps direct your compositional choices and kind of create a really clear outline of where you want your values to be and where you want the eye to move as it's sort of registering this painting.
Yes, I have done pieces where I did not do a grayscale under painting, or even just a monochrome under painting. And I find that because I tend to sketch my pieces in a very detailed manner with the help of a projector, I tend to get lost in the map that I create on the canvas. And so being able to create a monochrome grayscale, if you will, map of the piece really helps me to keep all of the important details consistent in my painting and not lose them to, oh wait, did I do this part before? Where is this? Oh shoot, I lost it.
Yeah. I'm sure especially like with animals, there's so many with like feathers and plumage and like furs. There are so many little details there that you want to capture. Like,
yes,
that's
one of the hardest pieces for me was actually a 30 by 30 elephant that I called Mighty. It's a large African elephant, and I had sketched out all of the wrinkles on the trunk, and because it is such a massive canvas, and I had it really close so you could see the entire head. It was boggling at times to try to figure out where I was painting the details, because if you've ever taken a map that is sort of based on the elevation of
like a topographical.
Yes, if you've ever seen a topographical map, you can see how some lines are very close or very far apart depending on the elevation of that area. That is very similar to the way that my sketches end up being after I have it all in place. And so I have to interpret all the time when I don't do a monochrome underlay where I'm at in the piece based on how close my sketch strokes are. So it can be very confusing in the process of painting a very large and detailed piece.
Yeah, that scale, I mean, I think like there's a general sense of like, oh, bigger is easier because you have, you know, your full composition right in front of you, but it's not always, especially that large. It kind of reminds me of the story of like the blind man and the elephant, of like, you know, you can see parts of it, but you can't identify the whole. Like,
yes,
that's the whole thing with elephants. So
yes, definitely.
That's a really interesting story. I think I'd be really curious to kind of compare that to the experience of muralists as well. I'll let you know if we ever like have someone
It'd be
interact for
wonderful.
you. Yeah.
I've never done a mural project, so I wouldn't be able to compare from personal experience, but it'd be interesting to hear what true muralists think about that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they must really, I don't know, I would be curious to find out how they deal with that problem. So we've discussed like the large challenges of both Paramore and also like kind of large scale paintings. Would you say that there's like an easiest part or a part that's most intuitive to you?
The easiest part of most of my pieces is usually the backgrounds because they are, with the exception of Paramore and a few others, they're usually much more simplistic in shape and color. The hardest thing for me to work on is probably the intricate and very fine details of like the wrinkles or feather fronds or very tight patterns of the animals that I portray. So those take me the most time and concentration, and I think that is probably my favorite part of any piece, is trying to really work through that complicated section, and that satisfaction of having it turn out really well is euphoric.
That's amazing. So that kind of challenge and then sort of the thrill of accomplishing it and making it work and making it look realistic.
Yes, definitely.
That's amazing. Would you say that sort of like propels your momentum? Because you described like your movement around paintings as sort of hummingbird-like.
Yes. I love the process of painting so much that I tend to get a little overexcited and lose focus as to where I'm at on the canvas. So part of what I do as part of my process is I focus on an area until my focus starts to wane. And then I choose a different area of the canvas and I work on that instead. And it is still progress, but it is sort of refreshing that excitement by choosing a different area that really keeps me going on what others would consider a very fast clip.
Yeah. That's progress is progress. That's having a finished painting that's like fantastic and like moving really quickly is awesome. And so it's great that you can kind of use that to propel you. So speaking of like fun parts of the process or kind of motivation, if you have a favorite painting or like a painting with a particular attachment, which would you say is like your favorite or one that you really loved making?
Of the collection that I've presented, Paramore is definitely the one that I would consider my favorite. Because I really just, like I've stated, I love diving into complicated and intricate and colorful pieces. One of the other paintings that I really loved painting was 4 and 20. I loved trying to capture that thrill of flight and the feeling of air pushing against your body as you're moving at a very fast momentum. So I think that was the most fun for me from an interpretive point of view rather than a merely factual representation of the animal.
Absolutely. So it's again kind of that intricate challenge of both wanting to accurately capture the anatomy of these animals, but also wanting to kind of convey some sort of like blurriness or movement or emotion. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So speaking of 4 and 20, they seem to be moving in a particular direction. Do you know as the artist where they're going?
I think it would be hard to say that I know specifically where they are going, as I'm not a certified ornithologist. But I would imagine that they are going to their fall-time residence, because in 4 and 20, the birds that I depicted, they are red-winged blackbirds, which are a very common migratory species of bird that visit the northeastern states during the spring and then leave for warmer temperatures in the fall. And so in my painting, I imagine that they are visiting a wonderfully beautiful location during the fall to overstay the winter and then return back here. Hopefully it's as wonderful as we have here.
That's definitely an optimistic spirit to like bring to the painting, and it makes sense, like kind of with the spirit of like accuracy and education, that you just kind of convey that like maybe you don't always know exactly where this group of birds is going or these particular subjects might be moving. So that's a great point. And speaking of the kind of educational value of your paintings, what do you hope that viewers will feel or take away from your work?
I hope that my viewers will be able to take away a feeling of curiosity about the animals that I present in my pieces. I try not to influence my viewers' opinions on the animals or the emotions that I am trying to represent in my pieces, and that it really isn't I have no influence over how my viewers see my pieces, but I hope that by presenting a lot of interesting animals that maybe they aren't aware of or haven't seen yet, would spark a slight niggling curiosity to look into what are these creatures, and hopefully take that another step forward and try to see how they can help with animal and nature conservation. That word escaped me. That hopefully they will take that curiosity a step further and be curious about how they can help with environmental, nature, and animal conservation through learning about the animals.
Definitely. And no worries, I trip over words all the time, so conservation can be a tough one. But that's fantastic that like kind of taking away this sort of like impetus and call to action to do better and to learn more and to keep researching and kind of creating an unbiased picture of what these animals live like and look like, and maybe inspiring some curiosity. Would you
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you go first.
I certainly hope that it helps people to be more aware of the abundance of life that we have.
Absolutely. Would you consider it like a documentary project, or kind of like capturing record of this abundance of life that's present?
I think subconsciously that is the sort of mission that I have given my artistic process, is to document as many wonderful and sometimes bizarre creatures that exist on our planet. And part of why I want to capture as many different species as I can is because I know that the state of living for so many animals is in a very fragile or precarious state. due to climate and environmental changes and human influence that we may or may not have them in the next generations to come. So I see it almost like a duty to raise an awareness, a curiosity, or I suppose a sympathetic mindset towards animals and nature in general.
That's such an important goal, and I think so important to our time of kind of not only reaching to maybe an ideal of like eco-friendly lifestyle as it appears to other humans, but really looking and searching for what the lives look like and the ecosystems look like of these animals, and like how we can take care of them.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Laura. I don't have any more questions. However, if there's anything else you'd like to add, you might have thought of during the interview, or anything you're working on now, any shows you're going to be in soon, or any lingering thoughts, feel free to share.
Well, for those viewers who are interested about learning more about conservation efforts, different wildlife, and small and big ways that you can contribute to the conservation of nature and life on this planet, I suggest that you check out a few websites that I have created a list of here. This is just a few of many different organizations. So if you're curious about different humanitarian and animal conservation efforts, I would suggest looking into the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. You can find their website at www.iucn.com. If you're interested in animals specifically, I would suggest you look into the World Wildlife Fund. It is a nonprofit organization that is a worldwide effort to fund and sustain wildlife, whether they be in marshes, rainforests, deserts, you name it. They have events and donations all year round. So if you're interested in animals, check out www.worldlife.org. If you're more into just the scenic environments that you and all animals enjoy, then I would look into the National Parks Conservation Association. And you can find their website at www.npca.org. And if you're like me, a bird lover, then I would suggest looking at National Audubon Society. The Audubon Society is a group that worldwide tracks different birds in their migratory and stationary flight patterns, as well as promoting different events that, such as bird watching and tagging of different birds, that the public can be involved in. So if you're interested in any of that, then I suggest looking at their site, www.audubon.org. As for myself, you can find my paintings currently on display at the Straube Center in Pennington, New Jersey, Sumo Sushi in Pennington, New Jersey, and soon, a very few days, at the Ellerslie Open 39 juried show at the Trenton City Museum in Trenton, New Jersey. You can also follow me on Instagram at Laura Beard Art or on Facebook, Laura Beard Art, to see my newest pieces and where I'll be showing next.
That's great to hear. I can't wait to see what you do next. Your current pieces are already so impressive, and
thank you. Thank you very much.
They really are, and it's awesome to hear about opportunities to like donate your time or just work to improve the world in ways that really impact like creatures who need that kind of help. Again, thank you so much for speaking with us all today and sharing insight into your creations. I know I, for one, am inspired, and I can't wait to see what art you create further to like call attention to animals or just explore curiosity.
Well, thank you, Kira. This has been a wonderful process, and your questions really inspired me to think a little more deeper about my own process and understanding of my pieces. So thank you so much for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me as well, and I'm so honored to hear it. All right, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you to all our viewers. Thank you for watching this interview. This interview and exhibition wouldn't be possible without our sponsors: Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb, Johnson & Johnson, Amboy Bank, Magyar Bank, and most importantly, the New Brunswick City Center and the Middlesex County Cultural Commission of the Arts. They allow us to give you, the artists and art enthusiasts, a way to share your art with the public, giving you the chance to express yourself in the purest form through visual art. Our sponsors allow us to continue to host these exhibitions and New Brunswick art salons in hope of bringing art to the local community and farther. Thank you.